Welcome, students. I am Nancy Southerland. I'm eager to begin the discussion of Chapter 5, entitled Perception. Chapter 5 has 6 learning objectives. They are as follows. The design of a product today is a key driver of its success or failure. Products and commercial messages often appeal to our senses, but we won't be influenced by most of them. Perception is a 3-stage process that translates raw stimuli into meaning. Further objectives continued are: subliminal advertising is a controversial but largely ineffective way to talk to consumers. We interpret the stimuli to which we do pay attention according to learned patterns and expectations. The field of semiotics helps us to understand how marketers use symbols to create meaning. Learning Objective 1 states the design of a product is now a key driver of its success or failure. Therefore, hedonic consumption includes how consumers interact with the emotional aspects of products. In other words, products are rarely strictly functional. Consumers may want hedonic value too. Target is a company that has embraced this insight. Target focuses on products with great design as well as functionality. The Coca-Cola bottle also illustrates an example of how design can facilitate product success. Our senses play quite a role in decisions marketers make. For instance, marketers rely heavily on visual elements in advertising, store design, and packaging. They communicate meanings on the visual channel through a product's color, size, and styling. An interest in scent has spawned new products. Some brands utilize scent easily. For example, Starbucks requires baristas to grind a batch of coffee each time they brew a pot instead of just once each morning to ensure customers have that intense smell during their Starbucks experience. Stores and restaurants often play certain kinds of music to create a certain mood. Recent research found that participants who simply touch an item for 30 seconds or less had a greater level of attachment with the product. This connection, in turn, boosted what they were willing to pay for it. A food item's image and the values we attach to it influence how we experience the actual taste. These aspects can be called a brand's sensory system. Marketers rely heavily on visual elements in advertising, store design, and packaging. Many of our reactions to color come from learned associations. These are cultural connotations, such as the color black for mourning, but other reactions are biological. Women tend to be drawn to brighter colors, for instance. Because colors are so powerful, they are an important concern in packaging design. Ultimately, they can be part of a company's trade dress. Marketers are seeking ways to exploit the power of scent. You may notice products with scent just as aircraft cabins. A consistent scent could ultimately register with consumers as a brand's sensory signature. I would ask that we pull back into reflection, students. Imagine you are the marketing consultant for the package design of a new brand of premium chocolate. What recommendations would you make regarding sight and scent? Sensory marketing means that companies pay extra attention to how our sensations affect our product experiences. Marketers recognize that our senses help us to decide Which products appeal to us? In addition to scent and sight, sound, touch, and taste are also relevant. However, as Learning Objective 2 states, product and commercial messages often appeal to our senses, but because of the profusion of these messages, most will not influence us. There are many aspects of sound relevant to marketers. Brands can use audio watermarking to encourage the retention of the message and sound symbolism as a way to influence brand image with sound. Sound can even influence how we feel about size. Vowel and consonant sounds, phonemes, can even be associated with perceptions of large and small. Research has shown that when consumers touch a product, they then have a higher level of attachment to the product. Touch can even influence sales interactions. Consumer researchers are studying the role that haptic sense, touch, plays in consumer behavior. Basically, we are more sure about what we perceive if we can touch it. We have a tendency to want to touch objects. The philosophy of computer design related to touch is known as a natural user interface, and it incorporates habitual human movements that we don't have to learn. Let us do another reflection exercise, students. How has your sense of touch influenced your reaction to a product? Which of your senses do you feel is most influential in your perception of products? I will now discuss Learning Objective 3. The 3 stages of perception are exposure, attention, and interpretation. The image is related to Gary's story, as he traveled abroad and sought out milk as his beverage of choice. Many countries use ultra-heated UHT milk, which allows milk to be stored as a shelf-stable product. Gary rejects the milk. Why? He learned to equate the cold temperature of refrigerated milk with freshness, so he experienced a negative physical reaction when confronted with a product that contradicted his expectations. This is all part of the perception process. Like computers, we undergo stages of information processing in which we input and store stimuli. We receive external stimuli or sensory inputs on a number of channels. The inputs our 5 senses detect are the raw data that begin in the perception process. Thus, perception is the process by which sensations are selected, organized, and interpreted. This is the perceptual process. Figure 5.1 shows how, as consumers, we are exposed to sensory stimuli through our sensory receptors. We then interpret those stimuli to which we paid attention. This image also emphasizes the 3 key stages of perception: exposure, attention, and interpretation. Exposure occurs when a stimulus comes within the range of someone's sensory receptors. What a person is capable of receiving is stimuli within a person's sensory threshold. That threshold is the area within which stimuli can make a conscious impact on the person's awareness. The science of psychophysics focuses on how people integrate the physical environment into their personal worlds. The absolute threshold refers to the minimum amount of stimulation a person can detect on a given sensory channel. The absolute threshold means that the stimulation used by marketers must be sufficient to register. For instance, a highway billboard might have the most entertaining copy ever written, but this genius is wasted if the print is too small for passing motorists to see it. The differential threshold refers to the ability of a sensory system to detect changes in or differences between two stimuli. The minimum difference we can detect between two stimuli is the J&D, just noticeable difference. Sometimes a marketer may want to ensure that consumers notice a change, as when a retail offers merchandise at a discount. In other situations, the marketer may want to downplay the fact that it has made a change, such as when a store raises a price or a manufacturer reduces the size of a package. A consumer's ability to detect a difference between two stimuli is relative. A psychophysicist named Ernest Weber found that the amount of change required for the perceiver to notice a change systematically relates to the intensity of the original stimuli. The stronger the initial stimulus, the greater a change must be for us to notice it. This relationship is known as Weber's law. The differential threshold refers to the ability of a sensory system to detect changes in or differences between two stimuli. The minimum difference we can detect between two stimulus is the just noticeable difference. Exposure occurs when a stimulus comes within the range of someone's sensory receptors. Consumers concentrate on some stimuli, but are unaware of others. There are some stimuli we simply cannot perceive. Psychophysics is the science that explains how the physical environment is integrated into our personal subjective world. When we define the lowest intensity of a stimulus that our brains can register, we are speaking of its threshold. The images in the slide illustrate how Pepsi has changed its logo over the years. If the difference didn't pass our sensory threshold, we wouldn't notice the logo had changed. I would ask that we now reflect upon what I've just discussed. How much of a change would be needed in a favorite brand's price, package, size, or logo would be needed for you to notice the difference? How would differences in these variables affect your purchase decisions? Let us reflect. Some studies suggest that as we age, our sensory detection abilities decline. What are the implications of this phenomenon for marketers who target elderly consumers? Attention refers to the extent to which processing activity is devoted to a particular stimulus. The allocation of processing activity can vary depending on the characteristics of the stimulus and the recipient. Although we live in an information society, consumers are often in a state of sensory overload. Sensory overload means consumers are exposed to far more information than they can process. Much of this comes from commercial sources. We are exposed to thousands of advertising messages each day, in addition to the other types of stimuli we sense. This camera ad from Singapore reminds us that consumers do tune out stimuli. Experience is the result of acquiring and processing stimulation over time. It helps to determine how much exposure to a particular stimulus a person accepts. Perceptual filters based on our past experiences influence what we decide to process. Perceptual filters include vigilance, defense, and adaptation. Vigilance means consumers are more likely to be aware of stimuli that relate to their current needs. A consumer who rarely notices car ads will become very much aware of them when he or she is in the market for a new car. The flip side of perceptual vigilance is perceptual defense. This means that people see what they want to see and don't see what they don't want to see. If a stimulus is threatening to us in some way, we may not process it, or we may distort its meaning so that it's more acceptable. Adaptation can also affect attention. Adaptation is discussed further on the next slide. In addition to the receiver's mindset, characteristics of the stimulus itself play an important role determining what we notice and what we ignore. Marketers need to understand these factors so they can create messages and packages that will have a better chance of cutting through the clutter. Several characteristics can aid in enhancing the chances of a stimulus for being noticed, including size, color, position, and novelty. Students, let us engage in another reflection exercise. How have you seen brands use size, color, and novelty to encourage you to pay attention to a message? Were the techniques effective? Adaptation is the degree to which consumers continue to notice a stimulus over time. The process of adaptation occurs when consumers no longer pay attention to a stimulus because it is so familiar. A consumer can habituate and require increasingly stronger doses of a stimulus to notice it. Several factors can lead to adaptation. Less intense stimuli have less sensory impact. Stimuli that require relatively lengthy exposure in order to be processed habituate because they require a long attention span. Simple stimuli habituate because they do not require attention to detail. Frequently encountered stimuli habituate as the rate of exposure increases. Stimuli that are irrelevant or unimportant habituate because they fail to attract attention. The golden triangle illustrates how our eyes view websites. Students, Learning Objective 5 states that we interpret the stimuli to which we do pay attention according to learned patterns and expectations. One factor that determines how we will interpret a stimulus is the relationship we assume it has with other events, sensations, or images in memory. Our brains tend to relate incoming sensations to others already in memory based on some fundamental organizational principles. These principles derive from Gestalt psychology, a school of thought that maintains that people interpret meaning from the totality of a set of stimuli rather than from an individual stimulus. The German word Gestalt roughly means whole, pattern, or configuration, and we summarize this term as the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The Gestalt perspective provides several principles that relate to the way our brains organize stimuli, including the closure principle, the principle of similarity, and the figure ground principle. The meaning we assign to a stimulus depends on the schema or set of beliefs to which we assign it. In a process called priming, certain properties of a stimulus evoke a schema. This leads us to compare the stimulus to other similar ones. In this ad for Toyota, the living room evokes an image of a car because of the seat of arrangement. We will now discuss Learning Objective 4. Subliminal advertising is a controversial but largely an ineffective way to talk to consumers. This ad for the Australian Postal Service uses an application of the figure ground principle. Marketers can use both visual and oral channels to send subliminal messages supposedly. Embeds are tiny figures that are inserted into magazine advertising via high-speed photography or airbrushing. These hidden figures supposedly exert a strong but unconscious influence on the reader. We can do something similar for auditory messages. However, there is no evidence to support that subliminal stimuli can bring about a desired change in behavior. Some research by clinical psychologists suggests that subliminal messages can influence people under very specific conditions, though it is doubtful that these techniques would be of much use in most marketing contexts. For this kind of message to have a prayer of working, an advertiser has to tailor it specifically to an individual rather than the mass messages suitable for the general public. Let us reflect. Do you think that subliminal perception works? Under what conditions could it work? I will now discuss Learning Objective 6. To help them understand how consumers interpret the meaning of symbols, some marketers turn to semiotics. Semiotics is the study of correspondence between signs and symbols and their roles in how we assign meanings. This figure illustrates the meaning of the three semiotic parts of a marketing message: the object, the sign, and the interpretant. For Marlboro cigarettes, the cigarettes are the product. The symbol is the cowboy, which can be interpreted to mean rugged American. When a marketer understands how consumers think about a set of competing brands, it can use these insights to develop a positioning strategy. Marketers can use many dimensions to carve out a brand's position in the marketplace, including lifestyle, price leadership, attributes, product class, competitors, occasions, users, and quality. Examples are noted in the slide. I want us to engage in reflection now. How do your favorite brands position themselves in the marketplace? Which possible positioning strategies seem to be most effective? We've covered several key concepts in this Chapter 5 perception. Our perception is affected by our senses, subliminal advertising, and the factors which affect how we process symbols. These are the learning objectives. The design of a product affects our perception of it. Products and messages may appeal to our senses. Perception is a three-stage process that translates raw stimuli into meaning. Subliminal advertising is controversial. We interpret stimuli using learned patterns. Marketers use symbols to create meaning. Thank you for listening to the lecture of Consumer Behavior, Chapter 5, entitled Perception. I am Nancy Southerland. I am eager to engage you.